In the Name of Rome was originally going to be commissioned and was going to be called Imperator, Victorious General. I think it was in the aftermath of the movie Gladiator, and people were thinking, well, it's got a good Roman ring to it. I quite like that name because it's a book about Roman generals. So In the Name of Rome is a very evocative title, and it's probably a better title in terms of it sticks in people's mind, people like it, but it's only in a loose sense are these commanders, I suppose, fighting in the name of Rome and in the state. This is a book about lots of different people. It's potted biographies, but not full biographies. We look at a succession of Roman commanders from 3rd century BC through to the 6th century AD. And we look in particular at one episode in their military career. So one battle, one campaign, one conflict, depending on the nature of the man in question and the sort of wars they were fighting at that time. So a lot of them are men that we would consider to be amongst the great captains of history. They're Fabius Maximus, they're Scipio Africanus, they're Caesar and Pompey. Others are there more because they're an interesting representation of military command in that era, or they're just someone that is well documented. The Emperor Julian in the 4th century AD was not a major military talent. He was, in his campaigns in Gaul, fairly capable. He makes a complete pig's breakfast of his big expedition to Persia because he's never done anything on that scale and doesn't really know what's going on. So he's there more because we have some of his own writings, but particularly the detailed narratives of Ammianus Marcellinus that tell us far more about his campaigns than those of just about anybody else in the 4th century, let alone the 3rd century or the 5th century AD. So he gives us a view of leadership in that later period, of how the army worked then. So this is a book about armies and particularly generals, and it's a book about the society, the relationship of the commander to the state that gives them command and sends them out. And it's no coincidence, this being Roman history, that in several cases you've got Pompey and Caesar, you've got Julian, you've got Titus, in the siege of Jerusalem. These are men who fight in civil wars, or who come to power through civil wars. And that's such a key feature. And you have Corbulo, the most famous commander of Nero's day, and to some extent his career started under Claudius, who eventually is told by the emperor to commit suicide because a relative is implicated in conspiracy, and Nero is not the most trusting of men in the first place. So it's looking at, Corbulo is supposed to have said, according to the historian Tacitus, rather wistfully, when he's campaigning in Germany and he's advancing beyond the Rhine, and then orders arrive from Rome, the Emperor Claudius telling him, no, I don't want you to do that, go back to your province, go back to the settled area. And he's supposed to have lamented, how happy the Roman generals were of the past. It is a different relationship. Being the commander who is there as a legatus, a subordinate, an appointee, a representative of the emperor, is rather different to being a proconsul or a propraetor in the past, even though their freedom of action varies very much on who they are and what the circumstances are at the time. Julius Caesar didn't really do anything that was fundamentally different to the way other Roman governors acted in their provinces, but he got away with a lot more, and he was far, far more ambitious. He interpreted his duties extraordinarily liberally, and his famous Gallic Wars, his commentaries on the campaigns in Gaul, are very much justification of, well, the Helvetii come, they try and break into my province, I stop them, but then I get an appeal for help from allies of the Roman Republic because the Helvetii are devastating their land. So obviously I've got to help our allies. So I advance beyond the province, I fight the Helvetii, then I get another appeal from another tribe for help against another foreign enemy. So I better go and do that because after all, we need to look after our allies, and so on and so on. These explanations will take him to Britain, they'll take him beyond the Rhine. Caesar's campaigns have to be set in that particular context of the time. So it's a book about the generals, it's a book about their personalities, where we know something of them, which again varies from individual to individual, and the sort of evidence we have for them. There's a chapter on the Emperor Trajan, who is famous as one of the great military emperors. You can go to Rome today and see Trajan's column with relief showing his campaigns in Dacia, all these sculpted scenes going up in a spiral, this high column, or you can see casts of them in this museum on the outskirts of Rome, Museum of Roman Civilization has a copy, and there's one in Bucharest as well, where you can actually get up close and look at the incredible detail in these scenes, which must have been pretty much impossible for passers-by to see when the column was just as it is today, up there and high, even though the scenes were painted. We've got all those details. It's like looking at the Bayeux Tapestry, but without the captions on it. And we know a lot archaeologically about the organisation, the structure, the equipment of the Roman army in the early 2nd century AD, but we have no good literary account of his 2 wars in Dacia, let alone his campaigns in the Eastern Kingdoms and against the Parthians that come at the end of his reign. So this is a chapter where you have to rely on different types of evidence, and you're really hinting, you can't tell the story. You assume how far is the way he's running an army, how far is the way the Roman army works then similar to the more detailed accounts we've had to some extent in Tacitus. But really, you've only got Josephus for the army of the Principate giving you a very detailed account of certain operations, or you're going back to Julius Caesar, which is an army that has not yet become this permanent, regular, professional force that we see under the emperors. So through doing this, we get to look at all sorts of questions about Roman politics and society, just who these generals are, how much experience they have before they get a post, how they're selected, how much freedom of action they have once they're there, but also what sort of army are they leading? What is the military situation? What's the political situation? What do they expect to do? How are they expected to do it? How well do they achieve it? So again, it's a book where, because you're only really covering, Caesar is the only man to feature in 2 chapters, or Caesar and Pompey, because we have a chapter each on Caesar and a chapter on Pompey fighting their foreign campaigns, and then one on the Civil War where they clash in 49-48 BC. Other than that, everybody else just features for the 1 chapter. I could perhaps have selected a few others, though I don't think I could have done anyone else in the sort of detail that it warrants. And it's frustrating that there's no one from the 3rd century, no one from the 5th century. And even periods like the 2nd century AD, where we do have Trajan, so little is known about how he actually did things on campaign. There's all these very detailed reliefs, depictions of moments in the Dacian campaigns, but we don't really know what it meant. We don't really know what's involved. So this is a book to dip into, to give you a wider impression. Again, it's not a bad way, particularly if you're inclined towards military history, of getting an overview of the development of the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. If you want to know more, you'll need to go to other books, whether mine or anybody else's, on the detail. But that's what it was intended to be, and I think it works on that basis, that you can't expect it to answer all the questions about Caesar, let alone Trajan or Julian, but it gives you an idea of what they were doing, what the empire was like, particularly what the army and what warfare was like at each stage in Roman history. So it's a guide to that, and it's an introduction to how Romans commanded, and I think that's what makes it useful.